Hello, I'm Dave Fisher from Flying Fish. A lot of people have asked me how to set an engine up, so I thought wouldn't it be a good idea to take an engine, not just set it up, but take it from running in process right through ready for 3D action. Here we have the model, which is a Raptor G4. The motor is installed with all the tubing. Let's have a think about some of the things that can cause problems. When you first get the 105, the bolt that retains the throttle arm here is not always tight. Make sure that it's Loctited and set up correctly. Then we want to set up throttle linkage and make sure that you have 100% travel from 0 to fully closed right the way up to fully open without any jamming. That's important. Moving on to fuel tubing, make sure that if it's a new engine, all the fuel tubing is new, including the clunk fuel line. Clunk fuel line silicon tubing is attacked by nitromethane fuel, and you'll find that sometimes a month, 2 months, the tubing goes very much like marshmallow, very soft and chewy. There are particles that can go into the needle valve and clog the engine up. So brand new fuel tubing on the clunk line and through the engine. This is a regulated engine, which means that it's pressurized fuel, and the back crankcase has a nipple on it here. As the engine runs, it pressurizes the tank up to probably about 13 psi above atmospheric pressure. This now is forced through the fuel line to the motor, and you have a little diaphragm here, and the vacuum in the engine as it runs changes, and this causes the diaphragm to move and let fuel in. Stops the engine flooding when it's not turning over. When it's running, it allows fuel in. So good fuel tubing. We have the fuel line here, which will require 10 centimeters between the fuel nipple and the check valve. The valve allows pressure to go through one way and not return to the engine. Make sure the valve is the correct way round. If it's the wrong way round, the engine won't run. And then any length from that valve to the top of the fuel tank. This will have a split, a three-way connector in here. This will allow us to release pressure after the engine has run. There. It'll also allow us to fuel it up. When that's out, we can now clamp the fuel to the engine. That's the fueling process and how it's plumbed. Moving on to the actual plug of the engine, make sure you use the correct plug. We won't go into this now, but the temperature of the plug is important. Use the manufacturer's recommended plug, which is an OS number 8 on here. And what we're going to do now is fill up and talk about the initial settings, the initial run. So we've got the motor in, we talked about the plumbing. Now we're actually practically going to get the engine ready for running. A few things to talk about here, keep it fairly short and brief. When an engine first starts up, it may have lubrication in it when it's built. It may have a little bit of oil when they assemble the parts, but probably not much. So what you don't really want to be doing is getting the starter on, spin, 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 spin. The motor's turning over but not firing, it's running dry, hasn't got fuel in, can damage the motor. This is a new motor, we want to give it the best starting life. So what I would recommend, what I normally do, is I take the plug out, put the piston, doesn't really matter where the piston is too much, put it down a little bit so we've got a bit of volume there. Fire some fuel in from the fuel pump, turn the engine over slowly to get rid of the excess and put the plug back in. Then we can put the starter on, make sure the throttle is on its idle position, and just spin and get the fuel drawn in through the carb. Now we have an engine which has fuel in from the carb, fuel in around the piston, lubrication everywhere, and when it fires up it's going to be happy, it's not going to be running dry. Let's take that plug out, ratchet off, spin it out. Watch you don't lose the washer. You're in the middle of a field, you lose the washer and now you can't find it, and you end up with putting the plug in without and the compression ratio is wrong and so on. So look after that. There's the washer around there, brand new plug. We're going to put fuel into the cylinder of the engine. If I can just ask Paul here to support the heli for me. What I'm going to do is just prime that fuel line, and we'll just put this in here. It doesn't matter if you put too much fuel in here, because we're going to turn it over and get rid of the excess. Okay, so there we are, and I'm just going to turn that like that. There's loads of fuel in there, just make sure, yeah, that was coming out. Excessive amount of fuel. Now what I'm going to do is just turn the engine over. Okay, so turn it by hand, and if you notice it's expelling the excess fuel. Any excess fuel will be shot out either through the exhaust port or the head, and what that's done, it's lubricated the top end of the engine, the cylinder of the engine. We can now put the plug back in. You must turn it over and get rid of the excess, otherwise you'll just have a compression lock when you go to turn it over, and you won't be able to get it to spin at all. So there we are, there's the excess. If you do find you haven't got enough fuel out, then you can always take the plug out and just spin it again by hand just to get rid of it. You can't really do much harm as long as you don't ram it over with a powerful starter, and there we go, powerful starter, and not getting rid of that excess. As long as you got rid of the excess, you'll be fine. One of the things to be careful about is, I was talking about leaning and richening the mixture. Very often people say which way is lean and which way is richen. As we rotate clockwise, like your bath tap, as you rotate clockwise, that leans out. That shuts the fuel off, okay, on both needles. So clockwise leans out, anti-clockwise richens the helicopter. Let's talk about fuel. Very important. What we want to do with a nitro engine is stick with a constant fuel supply to the engine. We want to make sure that we don't keep changing nitro content, we don't change brand of fuel, oil contents, viscosity of oils, and so on. So what you want to do is stick with a brand that you're likely to stay with, and don't keep swapping, okay? Now, nitro content is very important for the engine. The OS 105 is designed for 15% nitro. Everyone wants more power, so they start putting more nitro in, and as you add more nitro, you get more oxygen produced, you then have more fuel going into the cylinder, which causes more compression, and then the engine can run badly if it's not shimmed correctly. The box will supply the motor with a standard shim, that's fine for 15. If you go to 20% fuel, an extra 1.1mm shim is advisable to go under the head, and if you then go to 30% nitro, it's advisable to put an extra 0.2mm shim in the head. Now let's explain this properly. Standard shim is 0.1, if you're 20% it's extra 0.1, and if you're 30% you have your 0.1 plus 0.2mm shim. Okay, so that's how we would shim it up. We have been doing a lot of experimenting with fuels. That's another subject, and we're finding that with the Opti 20-25%, with the mix we have, this engine will run with standard shimming on 20 and 25% fuel. Okay, here we go. We're going to start fueling up. So remove the plug in the top of the tank. We want to make sure we've clamped the engine here to make sure that we don't get any fuel going through into the engine. We're not likely to get a lot of fuel through into the engine because the diaphragm regulator will stop it going in, but clamp it anyway just to make sure. Here we go, fuel in there, and we'll just fill up that tank. Could take a while. One of the nice things about the regulated engine, not having pressure to the silencer, means that we can't overfill the tank and fill up the silencer full of fuel and lock the engine up. Here it'll just come out the top of the tank through the breather here. Notice we have a filter in the fuel line as well. Many people say, oh, don't put a filter in there because you're filtering your fuel from the fuel tank here, from the actual main storage tank, and you're not going to have any mess or muck or debris in the fuel in the tank at all. Well, that's not strictly true. What you tend to find is this fuel, when it's filtered from the factory, goes through paper filters, and you get minute amounts of fibre, paper filter fibre going in, so small. But if you're using over a period of 6 months, a year with your fuel pump, those bits of fibre will actually work their way through the fuel line. It's much better to capture that fibre in that fuel filter than get it into your carb, because it's going to be a lot more tricky to clean the carb out. There we go. I haven't let it come out the vent, but we're pretty well full there. Let's plug, there we are, the vent, and let's plug fill line, and now we can switch on the fuel ready to the engine. Just a quick reminder, the manual says 2.5 turns open on the main, and on the mid we're going to go 1 1/4 turns out as well. That's all ready. So the next stage is we've primed the top of the engine. We want to get fuel into the carburettor. So now with my prepared starter, this at the moment isn't ready to fire up. We haven't even got the radio on. We just make sure that the motor is on idle, and all we're doing is just getting fuel into the engine before we start the motor. Now I just heard when I turned that over The bung is still in the exhaust, okay? Don't forget to take that out, otherwise you'll have endless trouble. Okay, here we go. Okay, not intending to run this, all we do is getting fuel in, and when the throttle is closed right down, you don't tend to get very much fuel in, so I'm just opening the throttle a fraction. That should be fine. We're ready to now put the radio on and go for our initial start up of the motor. Okay, so we're ready to start now. We have our transmitter close. Everything is as it should be. Throttle is down. Initially, you notice as I'm turning there, the idle position, just going to bring it up slightly from fully closed, ready to spin it over. Let's ignite the glow and let's spin the motor over. See how we go. This is honestly the first start of the motor, so let's see how we get on. Just check the glow's gone off, so let's try again. There we go, look at that. Now the idle is too low, so I'm just going to bring that up slightly. But you can see that priming of the engine from the back of the carb, top of the cylinder, has allowed it to fire up with none of this spin, spin, spin where it's all dry. Here we go, let's try again. And there we are, straight away. No dramas, the engine is ticking over, running nicely, right out of the box, and that's how it should be. The engine hasn't run dry at all, never been run dry. When you're running engines, you really don't want to ever have an engine running lean. If you have an engine that's run lean, it's starting to take precious bits of metal off the engine and destroy the actual internal components. So running lean is a no-no. You can never do the engine any harm running it rich. Everyone's questing for more power, but if you run it a little bit rich, it'll give power for longer. So we're ready now to lift the machine up into the air. We don't really know where the mixture settings are, top and bottom, until we fly it. And what we're going to do is just lift it up into the air, get it airborne. If it's too rich, it won't fly. If it's too lean, you'll hear it start to, the sort of noise will be, when you hear that hunting noise, whatever you do, get it down and richen up the needles. Don't adjust your mid-range at the moment, leave that with our rich settings, 1 1/4 open. Just open the top end up if it's running lean, but I think you'll find we'll be on the rich side, so let's give it a fly. We're going to get my friend Phil to fly the machine, which is his machine. The reason being is, this is mode 2 and I fly mode 1, so if you say why is Dave not flying it, purely that's the reason. I can also chat and tell you about what's going on with the tuning and setting of the engine. We're just going to get Phil to lift it into the air. And you can hear, it's got a lovely rich sound. The head speed's not that high at the moment. We really don't want to worry too much about pumping pitch. We don't want to be doing anything that loads the motor. We're just getting those lovely surfaces to mate together at the moment. And this is, you've got to, if you really want an engine to run well, you've got to fly in a boring manner. So initially, we're going to take this machine up, we're going to float it around. And remember, when you're flying it along in a nice little circuit, it's actually using less power to fly than it would be if it was flying in the hover. So flying in little circuits is fine, but no real loading. This is running really rich. I haven't got a tack with me, but very low head speed. Let me just... So let's just have a look at the V-bar controller and see what it says RPM-wise. Right, so, okay, so this is way too low. If we run it really low on RPM, it's never going to bed in properly. You suddenly run it at a high power. Yeah, so you need to put it into governor, so as we're running up to about 1800 head speed, 1700, 1800. Okay, Phil's adjusted his governor setting, so he's got the 1750, 1800 head speed. Here we go. And that's now running at a flying RPM. That would stunt if you flew it around. Okay, so what we're establishing here Is that machine lean or rich? Well, it's got a lovely sort of mumbled sort of sound to it. It's not screaming, it's not running rich. But we don't know how rich it is at the moment because we're looking at the main mixture, the top mixture that we're going to adjust. So what I would say at the moment is just be happy to cruise this around as long as it's not sounding screaming. There's plenty of smoke, it's got a nice burbly sort of sound, okay? As long as it's like that, cruise it around for a tank. Now what we're just establishing here is how rich is that engine. Now he's had about half a tank through it. What we're going to do is check the top end mixture, the main fuel valve which allows fuel into the engine. We want to know whether that's in the right place for running in. It's all right cruising, so we're going to ask Phil now to come round into wind and gradually apply collective until he's got full climb out. We're going to watch the heli. So here we go, he's going to climbing up, full collective, full. Okay, all right, that'll do, and come back down. Now, although the motor's not bad at all actually, what I noticed there was that the engine didn't have a lot of smoke. It didn't get, if you notice now, we got quite a lot of smoke. As you climbed out, you got less smoke. The engine didn't go lean, but I would say it's a little bit on the thin side. There's not enough fuel going through. We want to see it slow up as it climbs and to get more smoke. That would be a rich engine. So we'll just land and we'll readjust that and show you again what it looks like. We've asked Phil to be gentle. He wants to just open this throttle up and go for it. Just told me it's hard to, it takes a lot of concentration to keep off the power, but you have to really. Okay, so we've come out to 2 turns out now, so this should be really rich. And you can tell just on the initial lift off. Right, let's get into idle up. Okay, so he's going to do the same again. Here we go, climbing out. 12. That's full. Okay, look, that's full, and you notice that the smoke got denser as it climbed. It had a lovely pull out, climbs nicely. So let's bring it down again, check your fuel level. There's the richness. Okay, you can hear that engine. It's got a slightly rough sound to it, which is rich. And that's rich. That's a nice sound for a running in engine. That's good. So Phil's revised his pitch. He's got 12.5 on the top, so we should be able to load it and test whether the motor is actually slowing as he climbs, which is what we want because it's going rich. Okay, we don't want to do too much. We just want to test now. Oh, listen to that. Okay, now as we climbed there, the engine went. Oh, you hear it slow down, even though you've got a governor. That governor's opening the throttle to get it to climb, and it actually slowed up. That is running rich. We've gone to the book, 2.5 turns out for your main mixture there. Okay, so interestingly enough, that mixture is, as the book says, 2.5 turns out on the main needle. So that's good. So you just got to be patient with it now, and you can see lots of smoke. It's got a lovely burble, and that's what we want. Patient. About 3 or 4 tanks of cruising around. You can fly it faster than that. You can actually fly it around in circuits, but you don't really want to be rolling and looping and punching pitch. All you need to do is establish that that's nice and rich. And you can see that that engine is perfectly flyable, and you could stunt it actually in this sort of rich setup, but avoid it if you can. Just let that engine bed in. You notice the thing can hardly get airborne. Okay, so now Phil's gone into 1860 head speed rather than 1760. So he's now letting the engine do a little bit more RPM, but the same mixture setting. He's going to go around, and in this flight he's going to be changing from 1860 to 1960, the high head speed that he's going to be running, the higher one, and then back again to 1860. So just sort of giving the engine a taste of what's to come in terms of RPM, but we've still bathed that engine in lots of fuel. What you will find is the engine will start to run richer, and there he goes to his 1960, start to run richer as it beds in, because you start to get more compression, draws more fuel in, and it starts to get richer and richer. So once we've flown around a little bit and we've got the engine used to these RPMs, we'll start leaning out over the next few tanks. He's gone back to 1860 now, just let it go back to its original RPM. You can start flying a little bit faster now, Phil. The more you can actually take care with an engine at this stage, the better it will be. One time we used to run engines in for about 5 gallons, but most people die of boredom now, I think, when they're used to their electric plug and play. But I would say really at least a gallon through it, doing this sort of stuff, would give it a good start in life. Now what, third tank, fourth tank?
Fourth tank.
Fourth tank now, and he's gone to his maximum RPM, 1950 is going to run. And now when he climbs out, as the engine's bedded in, it's got richer. You can... the governor can't hold head speed there, it's slowing up because there's too much fuel. And let's do another one of those, and you watch the smoke actually gets thicker. Listen to the note. Whoa, it slows up, so that shows the top end's rich. That's really good. And Phil's just starting to load the machine a bit more, and he's climbing a bit more. He just started doing a few loops and rolls and flying around, loading slightly, but not too much, just getting it going. So we haven't done any leaning out of the mixture yet. All we've done is change the RPM and load the motor a bit more. Okay, so I was saying while Phil was flying that the engine, as it beds in, it starts to, the surfaces mate better and you get better compression, so the engine actually starts to get richer as you run in. What we're finding now after a few tanks of fuel is that the engine is distinctly slowing up as you put your pitch in. So we're going to start leaning out now. We've progressively increased the head speed and got it used to running a little bit faster. We've got a little bit more load on it. Now we'll just bring it in, and if you look, we're just going to come in 1, 2, 3 clicks on the top end. And what we can do is fly that round for a few more tanks, and then we gradually get it to the stage where it climbs out with no noticeable change when we get to full climb out. That is providing you haven't put silly amounts of pitch in on the engine. This is running 12.5 degrees and pulls it easily. Once we got that sorted, we can start thinking about fine-tuning the mid-range. But at the moment, the mid-range left at 1.25 open is absolutely fine. So let's get it going again and get Phil flying some more. Okay, so what I want to establish here is to show that it's still rich. Okay, we've leaned out a little bit, but if Phil, when he does anything where it involves a bit of collective and cycling, the engine slowed up, and he didn't really push the machine very hard. It just slowed it sort of slowed a little bit because the engine hasn't got the setting that it needs to hold head speed. But you can see he's throwing it around a bit more, still totally comfortable to cope with the demands of what he's doing, but it does slow a little bit, and that's good. We're just loading it a bit, taking it off load, loading again. But I just wanted to try and establish that when it's rich, you will hear a note change, quite a note change on the motor when he actually kicks over. Okay, we've been at the field most of the day. Phil's got 6 or 8 tanks roughly through his machine, but we're never going to run it in totally. So I've got my machine, my OS 105 here, which I purposely messed up the settings. I've richened both top and mid-range, and I want to conclude how we finish off the run-in. So once you've put through your tanks and you've been gradually leaning it out and you want to finalise your settings, this is how we do it. So at the moment this should be rich, running rich. Let's see how it goes. So a rich engine, you can't really harm it. Slow on the pickup. Quite burbly when I climb. Whoa! It's not really climbing super fast. The other thing, now that's your top end. Your mid-range mixture, if we were to actually do some tick-tock type things. Whoa, 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 whoa. Can you hear? Look, it is, I'm having to work really hard, especially here, to keep that machine, look at it, kick around. It's not really got enough power, but it's such an easygoing engine, that it will cope. All right, so let's just now sort this out. So first of all, we do top end, always top end. Let's walk over and have a look. know roughly where the mixtures are. So I'm going to come in about a quarter of a turn on the top end. I'm going to fly that, and then I'm going to finish off with the mid-range, all right? So we keep adjusting the top end till we get a good climb out, and then we go on to the mid-range. The other thing as well is remember that motors take a while to warm up, so it's worthwhile just getting a little bit of power on it. And you notice now the thing's a different animal. Look at the way it's moving, okay? The climb, look at it climb. It's almost climbing at the same rate as it's descending, okay? And if we look at, you know, a full power up over the top, it does not slow. Look at that go. And notice the smoke is very consistent. Okay, so there's our top end, but let's just have a look at doing this again. So now look, it's rich in dust. And it's better, but it's still quite hard work to get this machine to actually go round. Okay? So tick-tocks are really the way to sort out your mid-range mixture. Okay? So let's sort the mid-range out. Come in now on that mid-range needle. It took me a lot to actually get this to run rich. About a quarter of a turn in. Let's try this now.
People there.
Yep. Notice the machine is more sprightly. Straight off, and it's got a cleaner sort of sound. Okay, so, but let's now try our tick-tocks. That's a lot less effort for me to get round. You notice that machine now is actually, it's still a little rich, but look at that, it's much easier for me to kick that round. Okay, let's come in a little bit more mid-range. Remember to warm the machine up, okay, before you go for final setting. Is very happy with the tick-tock. We're also listening to the machine. Does it get scratchy? Does it get hot? Does it hang when we throttle off? We'll check that. But if we look at our flying for the afternoon, what you want to do is have a hot engine when you do this, run it dry. We want to get rid of all the methanol which can absorb moisture from the atmosphere and corrode the bearings. We want to get rid of all that, and it's no good just squeezing the fuel line because the engine will shut and leave fuel in the carb, leave fuel in the engine. So this is how we do it. Clamp the fuel line so it doesn't spray all over you. Release the fuel line, let the engine run out. And when you heard that, that's actually what I was talking about when it's hunting. If it does that after hitting the hold, doing an auto rotation after you've run it hot, if it does that, that's running lean. It's running lean there because we took the fuel off. So what I'm going to do now, quickly, we've run out the fuel from the carb. We just spin it now until it will not run anymore. We've still got plenty of oil in the engine. We want to get rid of the methanol. and again, and again, nothing. So that engine now is empty of methanol, and the only final thing to do to protect it, if we turn it, engine turns anti-clockwise, if we turn clockwise till it just bites, that is a point where the engine has got all closed ports, intake and exhaust ports, and that seals the bearing from damp air going in as well.